Hey there, it's William from Boxer 2 Valve, and today we're going to make some progress on the R80 S, R100 S monolever project that we've been working on. If you've been following along at all, we first of all converted an RT into an S, put an S fairing on it, repainted it and all that sort of thing. Then we proceeded to take everything apart. We've gone through the different components. We've gone through and replaced the bearings and everything and cleaned up the final drive. And we went through the gearbox, different videos. Last time we went ahead and rebuilt the carburetors. So all these parts are ready to install. And we also have taken the timing cover and I had it powder coated and then sanded down the ribs again so it looks like a brand new part. And we're ready to work on the timing chain and install that. The bike's been parked aside because it doesn't have a rear wheel on it. It's been kind of in the way. So hey, you guys, could you do me a big favor? Could you go out and grab that R80 and bring that in? It's going to take two of you to move it because it's not got a rear wheel.
Yeah, totally.
Here it is.
Notice anything different?
Let me get my specs on here.
Here, let's bring it up
I
just a
think
tad.
You guys are too much. It's like brand new. What the heck did you do to this thing?
So, you know, we've seen you've been working really hard on this project, and me and Matt just decided that since you've gone so far and everything looks so nice, that it was just a perfect opportunity to pull out the short block and completely go through it. We put new main bearings in it. Thrust washers were good, but since we were that far, went ahead and installed new thrust washers, got the end float all sorted out, and then we vapor blasted it, completely reconditioned it, and then just so you could show all the people on your channel about the timing chain, we went ahead and put the used stuff on. So all this still needs to get replaced.
Okay.
But that bearing has been replaced.
Okay, that's a new one.
So you're pretty much kind of where you left off.
Yeah. Man, you guys are too much. Thank you so much.
No problem, man.
Thanks, Matt. Awesome. Well, cool. So we'll get cracking on the next phase here. Let's I'll get this thing up in the air and we'll look at the timing chain right now. Well, it was awful nice of the boys to clean up the motor and go through it. So dealing with a nice fresh block, I split the bike around so we could have a closer look at it. But this is something that if you, to go to the extent of what they did on this motor, it's really not kind of something that you normally would have to do. It just, the bottom end was solid, but they just wanted it to look nice, and I'm pretty happy about that. It's really going to be pretty cool. But anyway, now we're getting back into reassembly mode here, and it was quite a while ago where we took the timing cover off. The reason why I didn't put it right back together again at the time was because it looked kind of rough. The paint was kind of peeling off. I wanted to have that powder coated, and so we just kind of been going through a step at a time. I think this timing chain has probably been replaced before because it's really not in that bad a shape. You can see there's really not a ton of deflection here. It's actually in pretty good shape. We could probably just run it, but we're going to go ahead and take it all apart, and while we had it apart, might as well put new parts on too. So I don't really plan on getting in here anytime soon again. Okay, first what we're going to do is we have to deal with the timing chain master link. You can see that's on here. It's a lot easier to deal with than the double row chain. This is a single row chain. A couple things you need to do with this. So we're going to go ahead and show you that now. We need to remove the master link, and it's going to go through the backside. There's not enough room for that clip, that master link to pass through. So you have to sort of rotate it up into this area here where there's plenty of room behind it. I'm going to first go ahead and take this guide rail off of there. So you've got the nut comes off, and this wave washer comes off like that. And then this is where you got to be careful. There's a wave washer on the outside of this, but there's also a washer on the inside, a spacer, that you want to try not to drop. If you just sort of are careful, you can get it all off together like this. And you see there's that spacer on the inside. So I just pulled it off so that the bolt is still through to kind of support it. And that's how that needs to go back together again. Wave washer through and that spacer on the inside. There's also a spacer here, but that's of course captive on that stud. But we'll go ahead and take it off, and this is how it's going to go back together again when the time comes, with a new part, of course. Okay, so now we can get to that a little bit better, and I'm going to rotate that up into here so we can take that clip off and push it through. It's also not a bad idea to take the tension off of this. For the purpose of doing so, we can take it off, but then the piston's gonna go in. So best thing to do is to take a zip tie and basically zip tie this back so you get that tension off of there. So I just wrapped the zip tie around the stud and around the chain tensioner, so now this is free. So that way when I take the master link off, there's no spring tension on there. We don't want to jump teeth. The most important thing now is that we don't disturb the positioning, because we want to make sure that the timing is set properly. So a good idea is to just, let's look at the whole concept of the timing marks. So you rotate the motor around, you see there's a dot here. The dot faces up. It should correspond with a mark that's scribed on one of the teeth on this smaller sprocket. So before you take it apart, it's a good idea to verify that the dot and that little mark that's cut into the sprocket are exactly facing each other, and then double check that again when you put it back together to make sure you didn't mess anything up. So now we've got that kind of clarified, I'm gonna bring that master link back over to that deeper area here. Okay, you can take the clip off really at any point where it's easy to get to, because it's not gonna go anywhere right away. Like for example, right here, I'm just gonna grab it with a pair of needle nose on the end of the clip and on there and pop that off like that. Remove that top clip. We can also take this plate off of here at this point, no problem in doing so. So now that clip's just hanging in there like that. We'll come back up to here, where we can actually have a chance at getting it out of there. I'm going to push it through a little bit. And then the best tool that I think there is some hemostats like that you can go in and grab that pin and hold onto the chain as you pull this master link out. Now you see I've got the chain still captive. Simply take it out and now put it back in again without skipping any teeth. Just like hold it until we get the next thing kind of settled in. Just set it right back in there again. And now there's no harm in changing out the chain, but what works well, just be really methodical about it, is probably, I think, the best way to do it. We're not in a big hurry at this point. Let's go ahead and let's bring it back to where our marks line up. Verify that everything's cool, which it is. Zip tie can come off. So with our marks all lined up here, the master link wound up down here, and we'll pull that out in just a second. We need to take this chain tensioner off, and it all kind of has to go in a certain order. So first things first, Using a small screwdriver, I'm just going to get in there and pop this clip off of there. That guy right there. And now we can actually go ahead and take the tensioner off, push this pin in, or the piston in, to take some tension off of it. And this rail can be removed. So now we see how the piston hits the chain, but that'll all change now when we take out this clip. Take out the master link and pull the chain away. And now it just shot out of there, the piston and the spring. So that's that. We're going to be replacing these parts. Marks are still all lined up. Now we can go ahead and just simply remove the chain. Just kind of have to roll it off of there a little bit at a time. So that's the old chain. At this point, we're going to look at the teeth, and we'll see actually, it's nothing peculiar to a BMW motorcycle. It's just like with a bicycle chain sprockets or motorcycle chain sprockets, drive chains. You're looking for abnormal wear on one side of the sprocket. If it looks a little bit moon-shaped instead of being, perfectly sharp, then consider replacement. This looks very, very, very good, as do these. I don't see any abnormal wear, and so we're not going to change any of those. It's less common, I think, to see wear on these Simplex chains. But when they start making noise and get rattly, the chain's telling you something. It's time to go in and change that chain. And if you don't, if you put it off and just keep running and running, that's when you really see the wear. It's better to put a chain in once too often than to have to deal with the sprockets, because the sprockets are very expensive to buy, and they're kind of a pain in the butt to replace, quite honestly. You need really special pullers, and in this case, you really have to pull the camshaft out, and it's just really a lot of work. You can spare yourself. So this bearing here, the boys replaced it when they had it apart, and so to remove it, a puller of any kind of puller would probably work. The 3-prong puller from Kuko that we sell, or something very similar to that, which you'll see a note to on our webpage and below, would be ideal in this application for pulling that bearing off. But since it's brand new, I'm not going to take it off. But replacing it is simple enough. You can just imagine, pull it off with a suitable puller. It shouldn't it's not too hard to take it off, and make sure you put the proper piece here on the end of the crankshaft. Don't put the puller spindle right on there. You'll mess it up. You have to have something on there. Pull it off, take the new bearing, heat it up really nicely, the inner race, and it should just go right on. And maybe a couple taps, heat it home. Don't have to get too crazy, but heat works great on reinstalling that bearing. So that's really what's going on with that. So now we're ready to put this all back together again. The first thing we're going to do before even putting the chain in is put the piston in for the chain tensioner. Oh, and by the way, we did replace the bearing on our previous video series with the R90/6, so if my little explanation there isn't sufficient for you, want to see it happen, then please refer to that series that we did a couple years ago, and we do cover that pretty extensively. Okay, so I got a new piston and a new spring. Just going to go ahead and replace the parts. And here again, you need a zip tie. That's the best tool, your best friend for doing this. And set the spring in and push the piston into place against the spring tension. Like that, so it's in there all the way. Now take a zip tie and connect it together like that. Slip that right over, just like this, over the piston. Get that pretty tight with a pair of pliers. Now that piston's all the way retracted and it's out of your way for doing the next bit of work. Okay, so now we're going to take the new timing chain out, and it's supplied with a new master link too. And this is where we take great care that everything is still lined up. So we're going to slip that chain in. It's a little easier to put on than it is to take off. Like that, leaving the two ends down below like that, just kind of the way it came apart. Okay, making darn sure that my marks are lined up. Take the old master link that came out, the old one, and stick it in there, like that. Triple check your marks, make sure that's all cool. And now I'm going to rotate back up to that magic spot right up here. And then take my new master link. Brand new link with new clips, everything. Set the clips aside for a moment. And then grab the hemostats again. Just going to pull it out a little ways just to expose the holes back there, and then sort of fish this in. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's very, very doable. As I push it through from behind, it just pushed out the other master link, the old one, into my hand. So now just make sure that's in all the way. And I can see it's in all the way, it looks great. So now I'm going to rotate it back again to where I can kind of like work on it better, like that. And then I've got the new parts. I'm going to just put a screwdriver behind it to hold it from popping out and push this plate on. Like that, simple enough. And then put the spring clip back on. And this is the direction of rotation, so you want the heel on this side and the open end away against the direction of travel. Snap that in. It's not like I'm paranoid or anything, but I just check it one more time. Make sure my marks line up. Better check it one time too many than have a mistake there. And then it looks all good. So now that's all set. So we could go ahead and put our new timing chain tensioner on now at this point. It's a brand new part, and just going to go right over that post like this and into place. Now, a lot of times there's a lot of clips on a motorcycle that I'll reuse. Piston clips and the timing chain tensioner clips are two that I always replace. Recommend that you do too. And because they're just so buried, you know, in the important part of the motor. So we're putting a new clip on there. Right, now you can see how much slack that zip tie gave us to work with. It's actually a pretty cool thing, but it has served its purpose, and we will remove it now. That's all great. Now we'll put the guide rail in. We've got a brand new one of those. So this one, I don't know, it's probably not super old, but let's kind of look at the two. This is a really, the beginning of a very common wear pattern that you'll see on these, how the plastic starts to deteriorate and the chain is kind of left its marks in there like that. This isn't really terrible. We're gonna obviously replace it, but that's kind of what you'll see a lot of times is this really rough surface, and usually it carries its way all the way through here. So that's that. So we have these parts here. We can go ahead and then you can just simply note how we did it. We took it apart. We've got that bolt. The bolt goes in like that with that thick washer on the back side. And save that thick washer that goes over there. So we'll just go put this all on like the way we took it apart. So you can go ahead and just lay that one washer on there. The other one is captive on the bolt. Just slip that right over like that. There's no nothing difficult about this at all. So just leave those loose for the moment. And you see that you've got the chain is pulled tight, just in case, make sure that's the case. And then this tensioner, this rail has to just lay on there. These holes are sort of slotted. So you want to really just with just minute feelings, make sure that that's laying nice and flat. You can sort of feel it. And as you get to that position, you don't want it to put any tension on the chain, but you don't want to have any slop either. It just has to like lay right against it. Get that all lined up, and now we can go ahead and tighten those down one at a time. Cool, so that should do it. All right, so we've got everything pretty well buttoned here. So let's go over and get the timing cover ready to install. We have the timing cover powder coated, and we have a really good powder coater. If you need to get some quality work done, he's really cool because you can see how he taped off all these surfaces and on the back side too. So very little work for us to do. And it really looks good. And so then we cut the tops here to give it the original look. So it really looks like a new part. It's really cool. One little thing he forgot, or we maybe forgot to mention, is these 4 points here. That's where the diode board will bolt on. And it's very important that this is grounded properly. So before I get anything else done, I'm just gonna hit those with a grinder real quick. It's important if you ever powder coat one of these or paint one, make sure that you leave those 4 points bare, or better yet, just make them, knock the paint off so you get a good solid ground. There we go, that's the way that should be. Other than that, it looks very, very cool. So we can go ahead and get ready to install that. First thing we do is put the front crankshaft seal in, and there's a special tool for that. Guess what? And it looks like this for BMW. Actually, this is the driver handle and the driver, and the tool fits right in there like that, holds it in place. Pretty cool. You can notice how it's a little bit larger than the seal in diameter. That's the way that part looks. But of course, we can duplicate that with just a standard bearing driver and select one that also is just ever so slightly larger. And that's that. And that can go in. Now this one you can put a little oil on, just like ever so slightly, just to facilitate it going in. You can put it in dry too. Sometimes it'll kind of curl up the rubber a little bit because it's a relatively sharp edge on there. So I can put just a tiny bit of grease on there, or oil, either way. Doesn't much matter, but the most important thing is you don't need much. It's plenty. Okay, set that on there like that. And that's all there is to that. So I've got my parts laid out right here. When I took it apart, you may remember, if you saw it, there was one of the barrel nuts was missing, and the other two have been so over tightened that they've like flared out at the end here. I'm gonna not reuse those. I'm gonna replace them. We got some brand new barrel nuts. You need 3 of those. The bolts aren't correct. They were probably replaced at some time. They've got the little serrations on there. They're also not beautiful, but that's enough for me that they gotta go. But the washers are okay. So we got new bolts here, and these are all gonna get replaced. You can change out the washers. They usually are in pretty good shape, you know. There's not much can go wrong with them, but they are a special washer. They have and so they're actually kind of expensive as a result. They're over, I think they're almost $3 a piece. So we reuse those whenever we can. But they're especially thick and especially small outside diameter to fit in the recesses. So we'll just get these washers off of here, put them on the new bolts. These are nice shiny bolts. They don't have those serrations. They're correct. Okay, so those are hardware. We're going to replace the gasket, of course. Here's the new gasket. And we look carefully at the gasket. We see that it goes on only one way because of the fact that this is where you can see these holes don't line up. Flip it around, and now they do. And that also tells you one other part of it all is that you see the part with the writing on here is going to go against the timing cover, and the part without the writing is a little bit shinier, a little bit smoother. And actually on this side you don't really need to put any kind of sealer. Some people just, I think, put them on just dry, but I think that some sealer is a good idea because it helps to hold it in place during installation, and also is just seems to be the way, well, it's the way I've done it, and it seems like a good way to do it. So what we'll do is you only need to glue or use sealant on one side. And here again, gasket cinch is what I prefer to use. So I'm going to go grab a piece of cardboard real quick. All right, it's just a piece of cardboard here, and I'm going to put the gasket on here so I don't get my beautiful workbench all messed up. And then take some of this gasket cinch. This is still good. It should be pretty fluid for it to work the best. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put a little bit on the cover here. Don't have to go too nuts, but just a little bit, a smear around. And of course on the gasket, on the side with printing. Okay, we just let that tack up for just a moment, and then put the two parts together. So this is your chance to get that gasket nicely lined up so that when you put everything back together again, it's not sticking out anywhere, because that doesn't look cool. So get everything lined up real nice, just the way you want it. And then I'm going to just go ahead and flip it upside down onto the gasket like that, and let it sit there and do its thing for a little while. And while we're waiting, we can look at some of the other components that are going to go back together here pretty soon. So here's the rotor, important part of the charging system. What we're looking at is, what kind of shape are the slip rings in, not too grooved or anything. It's no telling where this thing is at in its lifespan. It's going to work or it's not, but it's probably, we don't know, but we can test it. So first thing we'll do is clean up these slip rings, which you want to do anyway. You can take a piece of sandpaper or something like this, emery paper. This is 220 grit, and just kind of wrap it around and give it a couple of twists like that, just to break the glaze and bring out that shine. There we go. Okay, so now we can test this with an ohm meter. If you have an ohm meter like this one here, for example, it's analog, and you can just simply touch the slip rings one to one, one to the other, and it should have continuity, which it does. So that These go open circuit once in a while is what happens. And so it's a part of a charging system check. If you're diagnosing your charging system, it's probably the first thing to look at is, do you have continuity through the slip rings? So we can say that for at least for now, the rotor is good. The other part of the alternator is this Stator. And these are pretty reliable for the most part. We do, replacements are available if they're necessary. There's also some that put out more power than others. A lot of details there. That's really beyond the scope of what we're talking about here today. But the most important thing that we're worried about in reassembling this is these brushes. And so when I took it apart, you can still see how the spring is kind of up on the edge there, because I did that so that we could, just save the brushes. We didn't know what kind of shape they were going to be in. But it turns out that they're pretty crummy. I'm going to undo that spring. I looked at it before, and they're kind of worn, and well, let's get a new one out here. You can see they're just a bit shorter. They've lost maybe about 3 millimeters or so. That's quite a lot on a set of alternator brushes. So we'll go ahead and replace the brushes. And there's a few ways you can do it. This one I just grabbed here. This is one method. You'll notice that the brushes are soldered on to this brush holder that's soldered here and here. Now, if you want to replace them with solder, we have that. We have that option. These are replacement brushes where the ends of the wires need to be soldered on. So if you are up to the task, there's just a bare wire at the end, then you basically melt the old solder, put the new brush in, solder it back together. That's one option. The other option is you snip those off, they go away, and then you have this other type which attaches to these nuts here. Take the nut off, slip the eyelet over the stud, and put the nut back on, and forget about the soldering thing. And the third option, which is the option that I'm going to choose in this particular case, is just to replace the whole darn thing. And that is always a good thing, because it will replace the brush holder, the brushes. It's all one package ready to go. Now, one other reason to do that is that on a bike that's got some miles on it, it's not just simply about the length of the brushes, but it's also about the kind of lateral support that they get, because these brush holders, they wear out, and instead of the brush being firmly supported from the sides, it kind of gets cocked in there, and the result is a less than optimal situation. So this one's honestly not that bad, this brush holder. It's not really super worn out. So actually, after closer examination, I gotta say, this thing is not that bad. It's still pretty tight in there. So even though I had fully intention of replacing the whole thing, I think I actually am gonna just pop new brushes in. Well, there's no sense in spending the money on it, I guess. I mean, it'll be fine. So, and we'll just go ahead and take the most easy way out of this and use the ones with the eyelets, because those are pretty darn easy to do. So let's just go ahead and do that. All right, so just gonna go ahead and snip the old brush off of there, short as possible. Go ahead and take with this my 8mm wrench, take that nut off of there. Put the new brush in like that. Notice that it only goes in one way. The wires go towards the inside like that. And we can slip that on like that there. And then we'll go ahead and do this. Set the spring right on the side with the brush protruding a little bit to hold it in place. And then we can go ahead and do the other one too. You can manage that from the inside where I've already got the spring in place. Just pull the old brush out of there. And snip the wires off of there. Make sure that you snip it in tight. You notice I used some really small snips for this because I wanted to make sure I got in tight. You would not want to have any of that wire protruding and arcing out on the stator housing. That wouldn't be good. But I got it nice and tight, nice and short, so it looks good. So now I can go ahead and put the new brush in here as well. It's sticking out a little bit too. That's about the easiest thing you could possibly do. So if you're careful, I think you can get away with snipping the wires, making sure that you get it in tight, especially on that back side here. But and of course, another way, if you have a soldering iron, would be to heat up that solder, and probably a cleaner way to do it. But I think this is effective and it works. So now you see how I left the spring sort of holding the brush intact here, both sides, and that makes this part ready to install. Okay, the next thing we're going to have to take into consideration is the diode board. This one looks to be relatively new, but that doesn't mean anything. We'll test it and see if it works. And we can use my old analog gauge from the last decade, or last century actually, but we can also try on this one to let's use something a little more modern that makes noise. You hear the beeping when it makes continuity. Okay, so diodes are essentially like electronic one-way valves, I guess, and they let current flow through one way and not the other. And that's really all you need to know about this, I think, right now. There's a lot of information about electronics. That's not really what we're here to talk about. But I can tell you that the ohm meter, it will work directionally. So holding one side in one hand and one in the other, I'm going to hold one to the back side of the diode and one to the soldered part, and nothing happens. Got to maybe scrape a little bit of that paint off there. Swap hands like that, and there you go. See how that makes noise. So while I got that set up, I can go to the next diode on top. We have continuity there. The next one, there. Okay, cool. Now, so those three are good on the top. I'm going to just flip it around like that. And now I'm going to do this and see there's no continuity because these other diodes on the other side, it flows the opposite way. So I'm going to just swap hands one more time. Okay, so the current's flowing through on those three. Swap hands again. Nothing. 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 So that you basically do that with both sides, and then you find out that that indeed it's allowing current to flow directionally one way, not the other, and that is a basic test to tell us that the diode board is indeed functional, and we will be able to reinstall it with very high probable of success. And in case that's not the case, we have replacement parts for all this stuff we're talking about here. We have what we normally always have, all that in stock, so you can get your bike on the road, keep your bike on the road. Okay, so in the meantime, this has all sort of, I think, adhered. And there is one more little part that I probably could have done at that time, but it's not too late now. And that there's, when you do a timing cover gasket or any kind of thing like with the timing cover, there's also these two little gaskets. Now they don't actually seal anything, but since there's bolts that go through here, if you didn't have the little gaskets there, the tendency for the cover would be to bow. Even though the gasket's not very thick, it's a lot in terms of two castings mating together. It makes a huge difference. So we'll get our gasket cinch back out again and just pop those on there as well. We're talking about right in this area here. And the only reason I'm gluing them on is not for sealing or any other purposes than to hold them in place. Okay, we're ready to put the timing cover back on now. Okay, the outer crankshaft bearing will slip right into this recess. It is a very kind of loose fit. It's like a perfect fit, maybe a slight interference fit, but there's not a lot of tension. But nonetheless, it's a good idea to heat it up a bit with a heat gun, get it nice and warm, so that it just slips right over the bearing. So just going to take a moment to do that. Okay, ready to put it on real quick, and it's great to have the gasket already placed. Otherwise, it's a lot of fumbling. Saves a lot of that. Just slip it right up and on. That's it. Okay, cool. I got all my new hardware lined up and ready to install everything. So I'm just gonna first just snug them all by hand, and then we'll go in and torque everything. Next we'll put these little, what we call barrel nuts on there because they kind of look like a barrel. Sometimes getting these little washers on those studs can be a challenge, but if you have a very, very small screwdriver, you can sort of line it up and let it slide down, and then just kind of get it on to hook on there. Just hold it in place and get your finger in there and right onto the stud. Just enough to hold it in place while you take your tool, in this case a 6mm Allen, that goes in there. Get that guy started. All right, so we had all of them snug and the barrel nuts all on, and now I'm going to tighten to spec. It's 10 Newton meters on the bolts and 7 on the barrel nuts. I think that's universal for all of them. So we'll go ahead and just get everything tightened nice and snugly and evenly, most importantly, around. So I'm going to do the bolts first, of course. Reset the torque wrench for the barrel nuts. Okay, that's dialed. Now that we got the timing cover installed, and man, that looks really darn cool, especially how it contrasts to the rest of the clean motor. So pretty happy right about now. And what we'll do is start getting these wires kind of sorted and in proper positioning before really going too much further with the reassembly. So we have that kind of all set up. So this is something you run into pretty commonly, is that these bushings are kind of like pretty ugly. And luckily we do carry these replacements. So this is the one for the starter wire that's going to go in behind the timing cover. Right now I'm mostly concerned with the stuff going in front of the timing cover. And that would be these wires right here. This grommet, on the other hand, is actually in pretty good shape, and I think good enough to use. So we can slip that right on there. And then these wires are going to be on the outside, whereas this one black wire, that's going to go back to the starter, and this blue wire is going to go to the back of the diode board. That's why we kind of want to have all that stuff lined up before we install the diode board. I just left this wire on there when I took it apart. It's going to go down to the alternator, and this blue wire plugs back into the rear. And now we can go ahead and bolt that back on. Now the rotor can go back on, and another thing to look at on the rotor is that this part that's going to contact the seal is in good shape. It's not a big groove in it or anything like that. Usually they're fine, but make sure that everything's clean on the inside too, because it's a cone fit and it just slips right over the end of the crank like this. Just give it a little pop. There you go. That's it. And then put the bolt in. The first bit you'll feel you're actually screwing into the rotor, because the rotor is threaded on the inside to facilitate pulling it out with the special tool. But once you get past that portion of threads, then it just goes in freely to a certain point, and now at that point now it turns into the crankshaft. So you definitely don't want to over tighten this bolt, but you also want to get tight enough to make sure that you check the torque specs on there. I think it's 23 Newton meters or so. And in this case, I have the gearbox out. A lot of times you won't. You'll have that in there. You can maybe put the bike in gear. Works out pretty well. In this case, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to grab a tooth on the starter ring gear through the timing hole to lock the motor while I torque that bolt. Boom. All right, it's now time for this guy here. And it is going to fit right over the top. And just a reminder of what we did with those brushes to kind of get them out of the way so you're not dragging them across the face of that slip ring here. And these are a bit of a perfect fit, I would say. So you need to, before you seat it in all the way, get each one of the 3 bolts started. With all 3 bolts in, not even drawn in all the way, just sort of tight. Now you can kind of feel for a sweet spot where the alignment is good. And then at that point, you can draw the 2 components together pretty safely, just a little bit at a time on each of the 3 fasteners. And now that that's installed, now we can go ahead and pop those springs in. So just going to push the brush down into the holder and give the spring a little push to the side as it snaps in and puts tension on the brush. And on the same token here, push the brush in on the back side and give that little nudge, and that's all there is to that. So those are intact now, and then we can start just plugging the wires back in just the way they came apart, like that. And the one thing I did forget, it probably would have been better to put this in before the diode board, but it really doesn't matter. It can be done this way too, because we still have the starter out. And these kind of come here, and it's really no big deal to get up inside here and plug that into the back of the diode board when the starter's out. Right now it's easy. In this case, it's no big deal. Normally you want to probably plug that in beforehand. So that snakes through here like that, and then plugs in here. It doesn't matter which one goes where in this particular case. And tuck that all in really nice like that. And good to go. Next thing we need to do is put the ignition sensor in. Okay, in preparation for putting the ignition unit in, the wire from the control unit does pass through that grommet that we identified as being pretty shot earlier, so I'm going to just take a moment to replace that first. Get rid of the old one. And it's not too hard to do. Just a little silicone spray or something like that isn't a bad idea. So now the little shrink tubing's kind of falling apart too, but no big deal. We'll just put a new piece of that on the cable end and proceed. All right, that looks a whole lot better with a new fresh grommet on there. And then we can just try to get the routing sorted out here. There we go. And the ignition wire clips right into the grommet, and we slide it into place. The connector goes in this way, like that. There we go, all ready to go. This is the Hall sensor, the impulse sender for the ignition unit that sometimes people call them bean cans. It's kind of a cool name for that because it kind of does look like one. They do fail once in a while. The bike ran before, it ran well, so I don't suspect any problems, but it's one of those things that can and probably will fail, and if it does, you can replace the entire unit, or we actually have the part that actually fails, the internals that we sell separately, so you can recondition the part if necessary. What I'm going to do now is just replace this O-ring. I just dug into it a bit with a screwdriver, it just broke. So it's really super brittle, a common source of an oil leak. Put the new one on, which comes with a gasket kit. And you can see that this is offset. It's not quite centered. It's very clear to see, and it's correspondingly so on the end of the camshaft. So you just sort of have to line things up and get it in the close ballpark. And then the other thing to consider is where this position of this notch is, and it's up on this side here. So we're just going to sort of ballpark where that goes. Mess it a bit till it goes right in. There we go. Once it goes in all the way, you'll know it because the little flats will go against the timing cover. Just going to leave those finger tight for right now because we're going to be going in and setting the ignition timing in the not too distant future. Now we're just going to plug this back together again, these two wires. The clip's already installed. It's directional, just snap that in like that. And what they did at the factory, and what the right thing to do is to put a zip tie right through there, so we'll do that right now. Pretty much just like that. Tuck that in like that. And that pretty much is it. Well, that's all we're going to do today because we got quite a lot done. The whole front end, timing cover is back on, the timing chain is on. We got all the electrical components is tested and reinstalled. What's yet to come is we got to still install the starter motor, the breather hoses, all that. We'll be putting the gearbox in. Very exciting will be to put the cylinders on and the reconditioned cylinder heads and build the bike up. We have a few more episodes to go. There's still a lot of work to do, but we'll be doing it. And I hope you'll be tuning in to watch it at boxer2valve.com, and also check out all the parts that we've described here on this video down below. Also visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Lots more to come. We've got a lot in store. Really having a lot of fun with this, and hope you are too. It's William from boxer2valve.com. Seeing you next time in a couple of weeks or so. Thank you. Bye.